Hello, welcome to the fifth of my tastings of wines from Pfalz wine producer Gerd Stepp. So today I'm looking at his Pinot Noir. This is the 2022 vintage of that. So the estate, as I say, based in the Rheinpfalz region of Germany, the Palatinate. This is somewhere where generally Riesling is the prime grape variety. However, as well as making some quite good Riesling, we saw Gerd's vom Saumagen Riesling, a Riesling from the Karlstadter Saumagen vineyard, which was a really nice example of that. But we've also looked at a Scheurebe, a Pinot Noir, a Pinot Blanc and a Chardonnay. Now, my understanding is that in his range, Gerd also makes Sauvignon Blanc, Silvaner, a Gewürztraminer and even a Cabernet Franc. Now, the Stepp family have some quite small holdings, but in some quite good vineyards in the Pfalz. Primarily, these are the Dürkheimer Fuchsmantel, Karlstadter Saumagen, and the Wachenheimer Königsvineyard. So these are a selection of vineyards with some strikingly different soils. There are vines planted on limestone, some on soils with an underlying red sandstone, and others are planted in loess clay. Due to the fact these holdings aren't large, Gerd also works with 20 very carefully selected local grape growers who supply fruit that help him to make up the entirety of his range. Now, Gerd was born in the Pfalz. He was born in Bad Durkheim, which is where the family estate is based, and unsurprisingly grew up working on that estate. And it was an estate that both grew grapes and also had apple orchards. Gerd studied winemaking, but having done that, went to the other side of the world and spent a vintage working in New Zealand. He did return to Germany for 2 years, where he worked doing some soil management research in an institute at Neustadt before setting off again to travel. And Gerd has travelled very widely and brings quite a rich experience back to the Pfalz with him. For instance, at one stage, he was a winemaker at Zimbabwe's largest wine estate. He set up a bottling line for wine in Nigeria. He worked in Argentina. He worked in Stellenbosch in South Africa and has worked throughout Italy, both up in the north in Piedmont, Veneto and Tuscany, and also in the south on the island of Sicily. But as well as travelling to make wine, Gerd also travelled to sell wine, and at around the turn of the century ended up in the UK, where he worked first of all for a wine chain called Oddbins, a company that I was employed by for 14 years, so we must have been colleagues at one stage, before moving on to spend 9 years working in the wine department at Marks and Spencer's. And while he was there, he helped to completely overhaul their range, particularly looking at German wines. And even today, now that he's returned to Germany, he still consults for Marks and Spencer's and supplies a number of their wines. Gerd chose to return to Germany to work in his family estate in 2009 and took full control of its running in 2019. Gerd's approach to vineyard management is to farm both sustainably and also to rely on natural fertility. He uses techniques geared to producing high quality fruit, but believes in low intervention. Having said all this, my understanding is that his vineyards aren't certified as being sustainable. Now, the 2022 vintage in the Pfalz benefited from what was an unprecedentedly warm summer in Germany. The early growing season, late winter and early spring, was unremarkable. There didn't seem to be any issues with spring frost, and bud burst and fruit set seemed quite good. The summer, however, brought searing temperatures and drought conditions. These hot temperatures were accompanied by long strings of bright sunny days. And up until September, hardly any relieving rain fell at all. Even when rain had fallen, the heat meant that issues with rot and disease were largely kept at bay. The resulting fruit was healthy, it was clean, it was fully ripe, and there were good yields. The berries that were produced tended to be small and concentrated. These are wines with strong aromatics and good structure, without necessarily having searing acidity. And this is a vintage that's given some red wines with some real power and generosity. So the grape variety here is Pinot Noir, or Spatburgubder, as it's referred to in Germany. However, it's simply labelled as a Pinot Noir, a Deutsche Qualitatswein. The region is simply given as the Pfalz, My understanding is that most of the fruit will have come off the Stepp family's vineyards in Bad Dürkheim and in Wachenheim. And these are vineyards with that combination of limestone soils and also soils with underlying red sandstone. Soils that the producer suggests provide both structure, I'm assuming that's the red iron-rich sandstone, and a mineral edge more likely to be coming from the limestone. Now the grapes for this wine are hand-picked, they're partially destemmed, so really quite gently handled, and go into open top fermenters for 4 days for a pre-fermentation cold soak, just to ensure delicate extraction of colours and perfumes before there's a presence of alcohol which will act as an extractant during the fermentation. Now evidently this wine was concentrated by bleeding off a portion of juice from the fermenters, thus leaving a higher percentage of skins to the amount of juice in the vat. The pink juice, having been bled off, was fermented to become a rosé, therefore leaving this wine more concentrated and structured. The wine spent 12 months aging on its lees in barrel before it was filtered into bottle. Now these barrels were French oak barrels that Gerd had purchased from the Hospice de Beaune. Presumably they will have been 228 litre Burgundy Pièce barrels, likely to be second fill barrels. So these will be high quality oak barrels that are still relatively new and should give some elegant cedary notes to the wine. I also have a note here that suggests that possibly, because I know this is a technique that Gerd has used, a portion of the wine may have aged in tank and therefore not had the oaking influence, giving him a portion of wine he can blend in if he needs to just subtly reduce the oak influence on the final wine. I also have a drinking window suggested here of up to 5 years. So let's take a look at the wine, shall we? The wine has its curious, it's quite a dark red, but at the same time it's not particularly deep. I can see through it very easily. Swirling it, according to its label, the wine has 13% alcohol and is relatively readily forming some tears on the side of the glass there. I've got the wine in quite a nice big glass there so that I can swirl it and make the most of those Pinot Noir aromas. So let's see what this has got. There's certainly ripeness and concentration. There's some quite high-toned red fruit notes there, almost sort of strawberry and raspberry, but that's complemented by an elegant, delicate cedariness and some rich chocolatey notes. And the aromas finish off with a combination of that sort of cocoa-y, chocolatey note and some oak-derived sweet spices, sort of hints of nutmeg, cinnamon, that sort of thing. Towards the end of the aromas, the chocolatiness seems to be accompanied by some quite ripe, almost cooked red plum notes. So let's have a taste. The wine has a lively, fresh elegance right at the front of the mouth. There's good acidity. You can see some firm and rather drying cedary notes on the back palate, but they're being enveloped by juicy red and black fruit, sort of mulberries, damsons. There's a contrast with a sort of a velvety texture, but also quite a smooth, chocolatey note on the mid palate. The fine tannins give good grip, but then there's a concentrated nature to what is really just mid-weight fruit. It's giving an opulent, ripe damson fruit concentration on the mid palate. When I looked at this earlier, those tannins were giving more of a sort of a bitter licorice note, and just through being open for 20 minutes or so, that seems to have softened that quite notably. Initially, there was quite a firmness to it that made me wonder if the approach of using saignée was leaving this a little over-extracted. Now the wine has opened just that little bit, the fruit is showing sufficient concentration to start balancing the very fine tannins. Currently, the tannins are still leaving the finish a little tight. Thankfully, however, there's enough freshness that some lovely pure mulberry hints and perhaps some cranberry touches are enduring enticingly on the finish. The wine does have a lovely balance. It starts with excellent freshness that almost seems a little lean and centered on the front of my tongue. However, very quickly, the richness of the fruit opens and balances that and has covered my tongue with this sort of cocoa-y chocolate texture and plentiful high ripeness red fruit. The palate closes a little, but there's some enduring perfume that's lasting really well. I think it's probably a wine that would benefit for a year or two in the cellar, just to help its tannins and fruit come into more ready alignment. But it's a wine that, to say the least, has developed spectacularly in my mouth as I've been drinking it. It's a multi-dimensional wine, which makes it quite clear to me why Gerd Stepp has such a good reputation for producing Pinot Noirs. I took a look at the Wine Searcher aggregated critics score, and there, the only mark they have, it's for all vintages, is 89 out of 100. I think that's quite a disappointing mark for a wine that combines this elegance, complexity, concentration, balance and integration. Personally, I'm going to score this 92 out of 100. And I think I have to say that possibly, given time, I might even feel that it's exceeded that quality. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed this tasting, and I hope those of you who've watched all the tastings of the Gerd Stepp wines have enjoyed those. If you have, for each, it would be great if you could press the like button on the individual wines, and it would really help me if you consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. And that way also you can set yourself an alert and be notified every time I publish a new tasting. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please pass it on to them. I'd greatly appreciate that. And if you have any comments or questions, please do put them in the comments box below. I'd love to know what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. I'll leave a link to the page on the Wine Searcher website for this vintage of this wine, so you can see how much it costs and where it's available. And I do hope you might consider going out and looking for some of Gerd Stepp's wines, because I've been really pleasantly impressed by all 5 of them. So thank you once again for taking the time to join me, and I do hope that maybe you'll come and join me for another tasting at some stage in the near future. Till then, bye for now.